And we're back with the Dr. Joe Show with a little piano solo there to get you in the mood. We're here with an amazing human, public servant, state rep, attorney, and author. An author who focuses where the crossroads between politics and what did he say, Dr. Joe? Politics, journalism, and politics. So he's got 2 books out now. Is that right, Josh? 2 books?
That's right. Yes.
With his most current book on a really interesting topic about an event that happened right here in our backyard, downtown Boston, that I was unaware of until learning about this story with our guest here.
And yet it parallels so much of the social divide that we still encounter. There was a line in the book that was interesting. Somebody there said, there's a difference between anti-abolition and pro-slavery. I think that was Fletcher.
Yes.
Tell me about that. What is that? So, I mean, how's it different?
Right. Well, I think at the time they were trying to sort of parse the issue. And, that's, again, many of the establishment folks in Boston at the time, back in 1835, that's what they would say. Hey, listen, we think slavery is terrible. We're not pro-slavery. We're just anti-abolition. And so that's this distinction they tried to draw. And obviously, the abolitionists rejected that outright and felt that they were one and the same. But that was a point of contention for sure.
Right. And then another person says, this isn't reform, it's revolution, was another line that caught my eye.
And some of the men who were saying these things are men that, that have, Harrison Gray Otis, who's one of the leading, figures in American history in Massachusetts. And, unfortunately, they didn't always meet the high expectations that we held of them.
Yeah. So maybe we can talk a bit about this. What is the psychology think behind this resistance to abolition, to saying, slavery is not a good thing. Let's move away from that. Let's change our world. It wasn't, for another 30 years that the 13th Amendment finally comes into law. So, and I will say that I think, given what we're seeing, there still is this enormous social divide, that somehow we think that one group of people is going to take something from another group of people. So I have some ideas about that, but I'm just wondering, Josh, what do you think as an author, as a journalist, as a politician?
A couple things I'd say. I always try to take an optimistic take on things. I think one of the nice things about this story is that, number one, you saw this small group of women that really took a stand and changed, you can see the ripple, effect of what they did, how it would ripple throughout history and change the life of Wendell Phillips. It changed the life of Maria Chapman. It changed the trajectory of the abolitionist movement in our region and across the country. It actually woke up folks who maybe were apathetic at the time. And there's, even someone like Charles Sumner, who we think of as this, titan of, this great statesman, was really at the time, he didn't really have much of a, interest in these issues. He was a lawyer studying his law books and really interested in the legal side of things. And, it woke him up and, wanted him to make a difference. Many of the women, there's a woman named Susan Paul, who I talk about in the book, who was one of the few African-American women who was allowed to be part of the Boston Female Anti-Slavery Society at the time. And she was a remarkable woman whose father had started one of the first Black churches in Massachusetts and in Boston. So really, it's a lot of incredible stories of humans overcoming, this thing, which is why I think we have to focus on the good, or it can be very easy to.
And I totally agree with that. And that's what the IM is not judgmental. The IM is saying, so this is the best we could do. The question is why, who we are, why we do what we do. Just to get back to that African American woman again in your book. She wasn't an original member of that group, right? Weren't the women called out on it?
Yeah, so totally accurate. That's a good point. So this Boston Female Anti-Slavery Society, initially it was only white women, and it was actually William Lloyd Garrison and others that kind of called them out on that, and they quickly realized, that I think the error of their ways, and they admitted Susan Paul, who was a very respected woman who had already been very active in a number of areas. So they invited her in as the first African American woman, and some others did join as well. So, change comes about in different ways, but absolutely. And Susan Paul really had a remarkable career. She's someone who I think certainly, I wish there was more of historical sources to document what she did, because sadly we've lost a lot of that to history, but we were able to kind of piece together some important parts of her career and show some of the impact that she had. She for instance, led a juvenile choir. She organized her students. She was a teacher and a seamstress. She organized her students to sing songs, anti-slavery songs, and she used that as a way to teach them both reading and writing, to learn the song lyrics, but also bigger issues like slavery and all the impacts that had, segregation. Obviously, she's still she's taught in a segregated school. So she was a really remarkable person, as well as Maria Chapman and a number of the other women that were involved. And so I think those are all neat stories that I think really are important to tell, and that's why I was glad to in a small way to try to tell some of those stories.
Yeah. Especially the women. Once again, women leading the charge in terms of social change and social justice.
And I think, Joe, again, it feeds into what you've been talking about, the power of respect. I think, you can see it. I think, even back then, the women wanted to be respected, and they weren't being respected, and the men were disrespecting them. And that was what led to, sort of the confrontation. The same could be said of the abolitionists. And so, that if we just listen to people and respect them, I think, I'm not saying that wouldn't have happened, but, things would be a lot different. And I think that wasn't happening at the time.
Yeah, I agree. And we have this brain that is unfortunately designed to compare sets of information. This is really the way our brain works. If you think about in infancy, there's something called stranger anxiety, happens around 7 to 8 months in a little baby. That stranger anxiety cannot happen until the child has enough data to compare sets of information. This is a familiar face, and this is not. And that idea of comparing sets of information perpetuates throughout our life. And sometimes we see somebody else that doesn't look like us, and it almost activates that same primitive stranger anxiety. Can I trust this person? Am I safe around this person? And of course, it's still an I am. It's the best they can do, but let's step back and look. Respect leads to value, and value leads to trust. We should not be surprised that when people don't feel respected, they don't feel valued, and they will not trust you. Not a surprise.
No,
and yet we see it over and over, but we can step back. One of the things, if part of the resistance to this change was financial, it also illustrates one of the great things that has happened over and over again. And I use great in quotes, not like it is a great thing, but it's been so powerful. We have increased our own value at the expense of somebody else. Over and over and over, we do that. I can only be more valuable if I make you less valuable. But that's not true. That's not the case. Every time you remind someone of their value, you increase your own value. That's what the I am is trying to say. And that's why this book, I think, is so important, because it shows that we have a long way to go, even though we've come a long way. So why now, Josh? Why this book now, in the midst of everything that's happening in our country? Not to put you on the spot, but
yeah. Well, I guess it's either good timing or bad timing, I guess, depending on your point of view. Well, I had finished the first book, and I really enjoyed that process. And had sort of, thought about something, a next project, and wanted to do something a little bit more Boston centric. That book happened to be a lot of action took place in Baltimore, and but kind of led me to that. And then I want to say the pandemic actually played a role, because I was home more doing Zooms and things like this rather than being out at events every night, and so I have more time to do writing and research. And so that I guess this was my pandemic project. Other people built porches and did things. This was my pandemic project.
It's great. It's great.
Did you find a lot of the information online?
Yeah, surprisingly, you can, and that was a challenge, because a lot of things over the past year and a half, are not fully open, or can be challenging to get into. But again, I'll say, like, the Boston Public Library has a digital Commonwealth, a partnership that they do, and there are thousands of letters from the abolitionist era that are posted online, and it takes some time. It's gonna read, each one of them. I thought my handwriting was bad, but their handwriting isn't always great, and it can take some time to really read through the letters and get context. But that really can reveal, because people are writing on a daily basis, so you really can get a level of detail there, which is amazing. And they're all, almost all of them are online. Some of them I had to, a few letters here and there I had to really chase down, or I remember I had to call a friend of a friend to try to find a letter, a particular library that I couldn't get access to, things like that. But I was able to do a lot of the research online. And we have some great libraries here on the South Shore. The Tufts Library in Weymouth had some great material on Maria Chapman. The Dyer Library in Abington had some original copies of the Liberator newspaper. Duxbury Rural and Historical Society had some material that was helpful to me. So there's a lot. We're really fortunate in that regard to have such a robust, group of historians and historical resources at sort of our disposal here.
Do you see this as a book that might be a supplement to an American history class somewhere?
Yeah, I think like a 19th century American history course. I think it's a nice way to kind of take one era and kind of dive into it a little bit more. And it is, there was excitement. There was a car chase, not a car chase. There was a horse carriage chase. There was a near-death experience. There was confrontations and stuff. So there was some drama. So that kind of history, I think, does have some appeal to people who maybe aren't sort of just into history the way some folks are. I think it has some popular appeal. At least I hope it does. And I try to write my books in a way that's not dry. Hopefully readers can judge whether I succeed or not. But I try to make it readable and enjoyable, because I think that's important.
How would it?
It is.
How would it play on the screen?
I think that's a great idea. It would make a great screenplay. It really would. There's so much to it. Dr. Joe, you could play one of the characters. I think I could see Wendell Phillips maybe. William Lloyd Garrison was almost bald, so maybe Mark, maybe that's more.
Do it. Sign me up. I'll get my SNAG card. I'm in.
That would be great. That would be really funny. Well, hopefully we can cast it with all sorts of wonderful people, including those people who support us all the time, who always have the research ready for us, who always have the data accessible and the products accessible. Let's take a commercial break. We'll hear from our sponsors, and we'll be right back with the Dr. Joe Show.
And we're back with the Dr. Joe Show with author Josh Cutler with his new book, The Gentlemans Riot, an event that happened right here in our backyard in 1835.
Yeah, 1835.
Long time ago, not that long ago. If you want, in the whole scheme of things.
Really not. A mob of gentlemen. That's interesting, because we hear the word mob. We've been hearing that word mob a lot over the last few years, and we do associate it with a particular type, and yet it's not. And at least this was right out there. There's a lot of subtle aggressions as well. There's this idea of critical race theory. Maybe I shouldn't say it, but is this that? Or is this just saying, look, this is what history is, man. This is what happened.
Yeah, I think this is just what happened. And, it's, there's good and bad. And, there's people who rose to the occasion and others that maybe didn't meet our expectations. But, I think there's a fascinating window on a period of time that had had an impact much, far beyond the day itself.
Yeah. And we think of Lincoln and, you know,
it's funny. Yeah. So at the time, it's funny because we, obviously Abraham Lincoln, was, the great emancipator and so forth. But at the time, some of the abolitionists were very skeptical of Lincoln. And in fact, Wendell Phillips once called him the slave hound of Illinois.
Wow.
They were suspicious of him and his motives and thought that he was, going to hold firm. And ultimately they came around, but it took some time. And Maria Chapman, and William Lloyd Garrison were both very suspicious and skeptical of Lincoln in the early days of the Civil War. So, they were they were tough to convince, but eventually they did come to believe in he was doing the right thing.
Right. And of course, it wasn't just that moment with Lincoln signing the 13th Amendment. I mean, there was hundreds and hundreds of years before and still hundreds of years afterwards. And
it's interesting. So William Lloyd Garrison, after the 13th Amendment was signed into law, sent to the states, and after that, the Civil War had ended, he really kind of felt like he'd accomplished his life's goal of abolishing slavery. And he kind of, he switched gears basically. Whereas Wendell Phillips really took a different tact, and really he was just getting his second wind in that. And he really felt strongly that it wasn't just about abolishing slavery; it was pushing for equality, real equality between the races. And so Wendell Phillips went on for the next 20 plus years and really continued to be one of the major progressive voices in America at that time. Whereas William Lloyd Garrison, and to an extent Maria Chapman, who they both had health issues eventually as well, felt so vested in abolishing slavery that once it happened, they kind of they changed their outlook a little bit. But so it's just interesting to see the kind of different takes that people have. And the other interesting thing I just want to mention, while I know we're running out of time, is someone like Wendell Phillips, who again became this major figure of the 19th century, all dating back in a big way to this riot that he just happened to stumble out of his office and witness as a young man in Boston. But if you read some of his speeches, I read one of his speeches from, I think it was like 1875, fairly late in his life. And he talked about advocating for an 8-hour workday. He talked about currency reform. He rallied against the influence of moneyed corporations, and he decried what he saw as growing income inequality in the nation. And it's just remarkable. You think about all those things. You could talk about all those things today. That speech could be given today.
That's right.
It was 150, whatever the math is, 150 years ago. And so that's what really kind of, when I think about those things, realize, what, it's not that different.
Well, that's why history is so important, right? That's why we have to teach history.
Yes, I absolutely agree about that. Yeah. Right.
But we have to change as well. We have to.
We don't want to repeat what didn't work.
But it hasn't changed. I mean,
because we're not teaching history effectively.
Or is it just so embedded in our culture that we fear the change? And that again is that stranger anxiety. Relax, everyone. It's okay. It's an I am. Everyone's doing the best they can. Let's just understand what it is. There's no reason why you should fear that you're going to be devalued when you make things equal, when you allow and say, let's do this. Even the word allow, makes it sound like somebody else has more power over someone. We're going to allow this to happen, as opposed to helping the evolution of our society. That's why I really wanted you on here, Josh, because some things just haven't changed. And how do we do that? How do we do it? So, the I am, we're saying we're always doing the best we can. We're influenced by 4 domains: our home domain, the social domain, the biological domain of our brain and body, and the I see. How do I see myself? How do I think other people see me? Because the domains interconnect, a small change can have a big effect. So given where we're at right now and the history that you are showing us, what small change can you recommend to our listeners? So maybe we can make a real change.
Well, I'll turn it back. I think, what you talked about respect. I think, the political discourse sometimes can get very coarse, and I think it's incumbent upon us. And I'll speak to myself. It's incumbent on people like me to find the way forward to respect everyone's views, and to make sure that civility is really the watchword of our political discourse. I think that's so important. We see that on both sides, or all trajectories, I guess. I don't want to say there's both sides, but and I think that's respecting everybody is really important. So I think what you're talking about here is has a lot of currency, and is an important takeaway to think about, and for all of us.
I hope so. I hope people understand that just because you disagree with someone doesn't mean you value them less. You can disagree with someone and still respect them and value them. That's how we have this discourse. It has to be based on trust. So, I have purposely not been referring to you as Representative Cutler, but you are. You are state representative, and
yes,
and a wonderful one. And I say that knowing a lot of your history too. The I am has the second truth, because the four domains interconnect and everyone's interested in what you think about them and they think about you. You control no one, but you influence everyone. You get to choose the kind of influence you want to be. Josh Cutler, what kind of influence do you want to be?
Oh boy. Well, I want to hopefully be a positive influence. First and foremost, I think, that is something we all aspire to, and I certainly do. And, I like to think that I'm someone who does try to respect everyone and can try to find common ground. That's something that I've always tried to do in my political career, and also just, in general. And I think, certainly most of the folks that I work with, I think, have a similar view. And I'll just say, I think in another moment of optimism, I think, because we do hear often kind of the negative side of things, I think the vast majority of people that I've worked with in my career in public service, are doing it for all the right reasons, and believe in public service and civility and working together and finding common ground. And occasionally we don't read newspaper stories about those people because they're probably boring and they don't, they're not exciting. But that is the vast majority of folks. And here in the South Shore, we have a great group of colleagues, Democrat, Republican, that I work with. I just actually tonight came from an event that one of my Republican colleagues had, someone that I work with a lot. And so, because I respect that person, I wanted to go and support them. So I think I take an optimistic take out of all this. I think, that people are good, and that, we can overcome what divides us.
Yeah, I agree. And Mark, did you want to say something or add something to that?
I just wanted to give him a round of applause. Yeah, that was an amazing explanation. And
I agree, because, we hear so much about this divide between Republicans and Democrats. I'm so relieved to hear what you're saying, that it doesn't need to be that way, that it's not that way in most state houses, certainly here in Massachusetts.
But it doesn't catch the eyeballs of the news, right?
Right. Yeah. It's not exciting. It doesn't.
There's that old phrase.
Thankfully, civility is still there.
Right. Well, with news, we're like preaching to the choir with Josh Cutler, who's a journalist, but if it bleeds, it leads.
Right.
And this doesn't always do that. So
I can't wait to dive into that book.
How do we get the book, Josh?
Well, it's available online, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I have a number of events that I'll be doing coming up soon. But probably the best thing is, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of local bookstores left around here, but Amazon or Barnes and Noble, and we will be doing some book talks in the near future.
Thanks so much. All right, everybody.
Stretch the canvas, rush with madness. Is it sadness or just a show?